Time now to join Frank O'Callaghan for the next instalment of the series Dundalk's Radio and Television People. Part 7. This is the third part of an interview with Tom Lamb and Frank Byrne, talking about their memories of working in GEC Dunleer in the mid-1960s.
But Frank, getting back to like what was done, the elements, they made kettles. Now, the element had to be made for the kettle, and it was made in Dunleer. The kettle was a copper kettle that was chromed. So you had to have a plating shop. Now you can't plate copper without pickling it, the bare copper to start with. Then you have to plate it with some other chemical, and then you have to chrome plate.
Oh, was that all done in-house?
Oh yes, done in-house.
Big bath,
Yeah.
been dropped into it.
People don't know that. I mentioned that earlier. The sophistication in that manufacturing facility must have been staggering.
Absolutely.
Staggering. And I have to say it too, in case it's not said, a credit to everybody, not who worked there, but who organised it, who managed it, who came up with the thought process.
Martin McCourt was the brains behind it.
And the number of people he employed, and the amount of money he put into the community, as it were.
It was massive. Like I always said, like people used to say, "Oh, you're very cross," and I said, "Well, he put the dinner on my table for all the years I was in it." Absolutely. You know, that's the way I looked at it. But getting back to the kettle, so.
Getting back to the cross, were you ever cross in your life, were you? I'd say you could be cross. I'd go on to the kettle, yeah.
But I have a long fuse. But see, when the kettle was chrome plated then, so you had this round thing. Now, obviously, you'd put a spout on it, so the spout had to be made. The spout had to be joined onto the kettle. Right. Feet had to be put on. So those 3 or 4 of these metal studs, and they were spot welded on first, and that was in operation on the kettle. The handle had to be assembled, plastic handle to stop the heat coming into it, metal coming down. That all has to be, and then the whole thing had to go to the polishing shop, because it all had to be polished up to look lovely and shiny.
Do you know, Frank, when I go home to make a cup of tea, I'll have a different appreciation of the kettle completely. I've never seen a kettle in my life like that before. I just go in and buy it.
And the old storage heaters were before their time. Now we've underground heating. It's something to the same effect. The heat was coming from.
That's right. Yeah.
Chippings.
But that was the technology of the day, like.
Oh, it was.
It was, of course.
So moving on, getting to the end of this particular section. If I asked you about your best memories, each of you, Frank, what would your best memories of up there being like?
Well, it was pressure. It was a pressure job because these TVs were coming to you on a roller track.
Production line, yeah.
Production line. I don't know how many they were doing an hour. They could have been doing 8 or 10 an hour, maybe more. And you had all your testing done on them and so forth. I remember the first week I went up, the only time I would get to the toilet was during the tea break. That was the only time you would get. That was the pressure. That was one of the, until you got someone. You'd have to get someone to fill in for you because the job. Some of the fault finders would come across and do testing.
You couldn't, if you created a bottleneck, you were in trouble.
Trouble, yes.
You know.
That would be one of the anxious moments that you would have.
And what about the least best memory, if that's the right phrase?
The least best memory. GEC was a good place to work. There was good friendships. The annual, was it the Christmas? No, was it a Christmas annual Christmas party? They used to hold it. It was held one year in the Abbey Ballroom, because, as I said, there was up to 1,700 people, and Aer Lingus provided the catering, and the social end of it was good as well.
It was sophisticated for it back in the day.
In the day it was, and it was my ambition always to get into electronics, so that was progressing in the electronics field, and went on from doing fault finding and being a charge hand, and then moved forward after that to different areas in the electronics industry. Yeah, you got to be a charge hand. Yes, yeah.
So what were your best memories of GEC?
The first thing that I noticed about it was Seamus Fox. He could take a circuit and he could read, like it was a technical drawing and it was all electronic components, and he could read it and he could explain how the signal that was coming in the whole way through and how it was going to come out in the loudspeaker. If it was a radio and if it was a television, again, he could just take up the circuit diagram and he could read it. The same way as a professional musician can read music. Now that fascinated me, how you could just, all these symbols put together and you could end up that you could explain that. And that was my ambition, to be able to do that.
Did you?
Oh yeah, in the long run, yeah.
You both, incidentally, before I leave the subject, you both spoke very highly of Seamus Fox. He was a highly regarded person.
Well, he was the production supervisor, and he was very fair. If you needed any help tactically or anything like that, he was the best man to go to, and you would never be afraid to go and say, Seamus, how does that thing there work? Or I'm having trouble with that.
That's right.
You know, you can always go to him. He was very good. Now, he actually, in the beginning, I used to go up and down the train, and he said to me one day, don't be going on the train, I'll take you up. And he used to take me up in his car and take me home again. You know, so he was that type of a person.
Yeah, he was.
I think I mentioned
And
earlier.
he was very, very good technically.
Yeah. He interested people at heart in starting his night classes and getting us all involved in electronics.
As I mentioned earlier, I think I did, that we were speaking to his family. And I'm fascinated to hear what you said, because I'd be delighted now to be able to incorporate what you said into his family memories, because I know Seamus died, God rest him, at a very young age, relatively speaking, and stuff like that. So his family will be delighted to be able to hear this sort of information, because as you know, sometimes we don't know everything we should know about our forefathers and stuff like that.
Exactly, yeah.
What was his wife's name? She used to make the tea.
Mary O'Hagan.
Mary. She used to make the tea and
She
biscuits
used to make tea, yeah. We used to get tea and biscuits.
The
A
night
break
class.
in the theory, you know.
Well, Mary actually opened up a cafe
She did, that's true.
down where John Fox will be telling us about this, but Mary opened a cafe down in Seamus's premises at the square.
Did she?
She did, yeah. When Seamus closed up the premises at the square, she opened the place, and it went on to be hugely successful. So I'm looking forward to talking.
Yeah, she was a kind lady, an English lady.
She was a very nice person.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Passed away recently there. So, ladies and gentlemen, listeners, over the last few minutes, we've been listening to some very nice, warm comments from Frank Byrne and Tom Lamb about the man Seamus Fox. And listening in the background to this all the time was John Fox, the son of Seamus, and he said very little. He was listening, taking it all in. So, John, speaking to you directly now, I imagine that this information that you heard was maybe the first time in your life you actually heard it. How do you feel about this, and what comments would you like to make about the lovely things that were said about your dad?
Yeah, so listen, nice comments to hear about your dad. Just to put it in context, I lost my dad very young in 82, so my memories of my dad are limited to my mum's stories and other interactions with people that he would have met through his business life around Dundalk. It's nice to hear similar stories that concur with the spirit of the man and the decent man that he was, and gifted maybe possibly in that area that he worked in electronics.
And given that you had a limited time with the lovely man in this world, what are your early memories, or what do you know about Seamus's working life?
Well, he was a Tipperary man. He was born in Carrick-on-Suir. He went to Rockwell College down in Tipperary. He further got educated in a college in Dublin by the name of Atlantic College. It was a dedicated college to radio operators. And from there, his journey took him to the RAF in Coventry in England. I assume he upskilled himself there, and he met me mum and their young family. Then returned to work. He got a job in Phillips in Clonskee in the TV production area. Not sure how long he was there, but he then got a role as production manager in GC in Dundalk, County Louth. So the family came up the road and we settled in Dundalk, Blackrock area.
There's a nice piece, a gentleman by the name of Fintan Harmon wrote a little book called It Was Sunshine and Laughter All the Way. It was about the working life of the people in Dunleer. And on page 3, there's a lady by the name of Kathleen Kitty Garrity, and she wrote that she was sent to Coventry for 7 weeks to learn about radio and televisions, and she was accompanied by various people, including your dad, and they were over there for a period of time learning. Are you familiar with that story, or what he might have...
I'm not overly familiar with that story, but there is commonality. When my dad was in Coventry, he came across another Tipperary man by the name of Eddie Hoare, and I spoke to his son only recently, and he's of the understanding that the two guys met each other at some training course in Coventry. So there must have been some sort of institute or training college available over there. So yeah, that's probably a link there that lady went over for similar reasons.
He was being trained over there in the manufacture of,
Ironically, just to finish on Eddie Hoare, he got married while he was over there. My dad was his best man, and Eddie went on to have a career in TV repairs himself. And independently of that, he with his young family, made his way back to Dundalk also via Belfast, via Monaghan, back to Dundalk with RTV Rentals. So Eddie would have been in the TV business until he passed away suddenly himself up until the 80s also. He lived in Blackrock.
So we've discussed a little bit, you were listening to it earlier, about your dad's time at the GEC. But when he left there, he set his own company named Electrotel. Am I right there?
Yeah. So he had a shop. He had a shop at the Square, next to Donald McCarroll's. You may recall Donald McCarroll was a news agent. The shop originally was a fish and chip shop, a fish shop. Correct myself there. No, Faze was a tobacconist. Hero McGuinness had the fish shop. I remember the tiles on the wall. I remember us covering the tiles up. So yeah, Daddy was in there for a number of years. It would have been maybe from the early 70s to the 77, 78.
And John, what service was he offering? What was he doing when he was in there?
So primarily he was sales and service, so radios, TVs, and he would fix the repairs as it happened back then. So I'd imagine he was an important member of the community back then when the TV didn't operate as
a man required.
As designed.
Yeah. And when he eventually finished there, the story goes that your mum Mary, whom I remember with great fondness through you, and our old football days back there together, John, she started her own business there too, didn't she?
Yeah, so what happened in the 70s with the cross-border trade, the punt sterling fluctuating, trade was difficult, it was inconsistent. You had a good year, you had a bad year. So Mammy, after a number of years, had enough of this, and she decided she was going to open a restaurant. My dad was dispatched to the kitchen, Mammy was front of house, and
does that mean James could cook?
He had to learn pretty quick. So I think he used to flip burgers and steaks and whatnot. So so we had a successful restaurant there. It was short-lived, unfortunately, because what happened next was that row of shops were to be demolished for the development of the square. But certainly, it was an interesting time back then. You had the buses to the rear of it, so it was a hive activity. The MP, I think, if I recall correctly, were behind. It was a busy square back in the day.
Ready for development, the time for the shops to move on. I think Donald McCardle's shop was actually the last shop to be there, wasn't it?
You could be right, yeah.
I think they hung in for a long time for whatever reason there.
Yeah, he maybe put up a bit of a fight, I don't know.
Dug his heels in, John.
Yeah.
John, you told me a lovely story once about the service that your dad did to certain people in Dundalk. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, similar to what you heard from Frank's recollections earlier on, he was a decent human being. He was a caring individual. one of the things he did, he used to teach the travelling community how to read and write from the shop. This is one of the things he did. So he's also into the art and drama. He liked his traditional music. So he was a man of his time at the time. Yeah.
So we're going to wrap up now in a wee minute, Seamus. Is there anything else you'd like to do or summarise about?
No, but it was just lovely to hear Frank's recollections, GEC and the pioneering business it was back in the day and the big employer it was. Ironically, within the next month, Glen Dimplex are finishing their manufacturing in Dunleer, so that's gone full circle now. So disappointing to hear that, but certainly was a Trojan employer back in the day, and we did eventually settle as a family in Dromiskin, so a lot of Mid-Louth people would have memories of my dad and the good times back in GEC in the day. But just to finish off on his work career, he then, with the amusement boom in the late 70s, so you had the Space Invaders, you had the Pac-Man machines, you had football, tennis, you might remember that. So he went to work with Dalgan Amusements then. So when he spent a number of years there as the managing director, until eventually we lost him, unfortunately, in 82. So thanks, Franks, for the invite. Lovely to recall all these lovely memories.
No, it's Dundalk FM's pleasure, John, to have you in here. And I have to say, it's stories like yours, humane stories like that, that will make this series of programmes so important. So a big thank you to Tom and Frank for their initiating the memories of Seamus, and a big thank you to John for coming in and sharing the stories with us. Thank you very much indeed.
That was the third in a collection of interviews with Tom Lamb and Frank Byrne talking about working in GEC Dunleer in the 1960s. In the next programme in the series, Programme 8, we will hear about the beginning of Orky O'Neill's Earl Street from Brian O'Neill, and Tom Lamb talks about working there, repairing and servicing radios and televisions. The series, Dundalk's Radio and Television People, was researched and presented by Frank O'Callaghan and recorded and edited by Alan Byrne.